Interesting topic of discussion today, but before I go into that, I know it is indeed a sad morning for us as East Africans, the passing of the President of Tanzania. We condole with our brothers and sisters in Tanzania over this sad moment. It touches all of us because of our family, the East African family. Now back to our topic. With me I have some distinguished gentlemen who will be dissecting and explaining to you, our viewers, those who have tuned in now and those probably who will be watching this later on. I have three gentlemen with me in the studios, and I will let them introduce themselves and tell us a bit of what we shall be talking about today. I will start with my left.
My name is Ludaaga. I'm an officer in science. It's the Science Investigations Unit, and I'll be handling the disposal, which is under the Applied Sciences. Thank you so much.
Then on my right here, I have another gentleman who will still be introducing himself and telling us a little bit of what he will be focusing on during our discussion today.
Good morning, viewers, those within URA and those, the general public. My name is Kiggundu Stephen, and I am a scientist, and I work with the URA and most especially the Science Investigations Unit. And my conversation really, or what I'm going to talk about today, is going to be mainly focused on applied sciences, especially the application of what we call input-output coefficients.
Thank you, Stephen. I also have another gentleman here who will still do the needful, introduce himself, and tell us a bit of what his topic of interest will be this morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Ssejjemba. I am a scientist in the science function of the Revenue Authority. This morning I will be talking about the laboratory services at the Revenue Authority.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen, for that introduction. The big question that we have before us is what are the scientists doing in a tax body? Naturally, when you think about taxation, and probably you're thinking about the people who work in a tax body, you will think about accountants, especially when it comes to tax collection. Of course, without thinking about the other support people, the HR, and you will certainly think accountants. So someone tells you he's a scientist and he's working for the tax body. So many questions come up. What are you doing there? What is your role? What role is it that you're playing? So I will want to start with you, Stephen. Stephen, can you just give us a general picture of the relevance of science? Why would you really have scientists seated in a tax authority and doing work for a tax authority? Just a general picture.
Thank you, Isaac. I think that's a very valid question. Indeed, when you hear that the science or the scientists working for the revenue body, usually it's going to be sort of a square peg and round hole situation. But just to form a basis or premise for this, we all know that things around us are changing. I mean, the way we live life, the way we conduct our affairs are changing, and it's common knowledge that it's because of science, the way we understand things that is changing. So, like your life is changing, even the tax administration landscape is changing. And that means that the only way forward is for the administration to apply that is causing the change, which is science. So scientists, in a way, are the future. They are the people that are trying to make sure that the revenue body delivers on its mandate, largely through the enhancement of compliance. So what we do largely tries to look at how do we improve our compliance and how do we make sure that the new challenges that are facing the tax administration are answered using science. I think that is as broad as it can be, but as the webinar goes on, we might as well break that down into the different sub-functions of that.
Well, thank you, Stephen. You've touched a very crucial point there: enhancement of compliance using science. And in your introduction, you talked about IOCs, input-output coefficients. So could you please break that a little bit down for our viewers to understand? When you talk about input-output coefficients, and you're also talking about compliance, how do the two connect? We want to see the connection between the two.
Okay, thank you, Isaac. Indeed, input-output coefficient sounds like a mouthful, but it's a concept. It's a fundamental. It's a concept of sort of science that is based on the fundamental laws of science. That to the effect say that you cannot create matter nor destroy it in any given process, be it chemical or physical. That matter remains the same. To use sort of an accounting language, the credits, the sum of the credits in the system must be equal to the sum of the debits in that system. So let's say you are boiling water and you're making tea. Usually what happens is that water will boil, you remain with some in the kettle, and then some of that will dissipate off as steam. Now, it doesn't matter which part of the world you are. You might be in the UK, you might be in the US, you might be here in our motherland. That water will still boil the same. You get steam and what the water you're going to use for tea. At the end of the process of boiling, the water that you put into the kettle and the sum of the boiled water and the steam is going to be the same. So what we have done as scientists, and given the compliance challenge that I will sort of elaborate on later, we've tried to go in, especially within the manufacturing sector, because the manufacturing sector contributes a significant portion of this economy. It's sort of the productive engine that runs the economy. So what we do is that we look at the raw materials that enter the system, and then we look at the process of transformation of those raw materials, and at the end of the day, we look at what products come off at the end of the production chain. Now, when we tie those together, remember the other law where I said that you can't create matter, you cannot destroy it, that the sum of that matter remains the same. We have to ask ourselves, if you use this much at the beginning of getting into the system, how much has come off? Our experience is that because our production processes are not efficient, you're going to have a bit of loss. Otherwise, all the material has to be accounted for. Now, to address how does that tie into compliance? Compliance largely deals with the question of how much do you adhere to the codified sort of regulations and laws relating to tax, right? So you're supposed to pay 18% of VAT. Are you paying that 18% of VAT on the supplies you've made, right? You're supposed to pay 30% of your chargeable income as tax. Are you paying the 30% or aren't you? So the level to which you adhere to those laws or the regulations is your level of compliance. Now, it is not news that there are people that have chosen willfully, sometimes, or sometimes without willful intent, that have chosen not to comply, right? So, as scientists, we come in to ask ourselves, firstly, the revenue administration, are people complying? But also the taxpayers, are you complying to that, to the law, to the set laws and regulations? So when you use input-output, especially within a manufacturing context, we ask ourselves, how much have you produced? How much value have you produced? And are you paying the right amount of tax on that value that has been generated? Sometimes some people will underreport. For example, there are people who will underreport their sales, and we know that sales are based on value that is generated. The way they do it is they will say, if I'm supposed to produce, let's give an example of beer. If I'm supposed to produce 10,000 liters of beer, that's a real turnover, you know, if you follow the process. They will say, no, I produce 7,000. And then they will leave the 3,000 and will not pay the tax to it. So the input-output coefficients and the study of the process helps to ascertain that actually 10,000 was supposed to be paid, was supposed to be generated, and you paid tax on only 8,000 or 7,000. So these 3,000 did not, you did not pay tax on it. So that's how it ties in. It's of course, it gets a bit more complicated during the application, but the idea is as simple as that.
Wow. Thank you, Stephen, with that breakdown. But I would just request that you probably maybe give us an example of your choice, a manufacturing setup of your choice, and you know, so that we can put things much better into context. If I'm a manufacturer of XYZ, so just show us that entire, you know, flow, inputs and outputs, and you know, basically what we've been talking about, but with a vivid example.
With a vivid example, let me use a very simple example: spirits. I think maybe people in the room or those outside will have consumed one form of spirits or not, but I know there are others that are teetotalers. They don't take to alcohol, but you'll forgive me, let me use that example. Now, when you're producing spirits...
I think we're now consuming spirits and
sanitizer. Yeah, so some might think the example doesn't work. So, when you're producing spirits, you have basically two inputs, majorly. You will have what we call ethyl alcohol, or extraneutral alcohol, which is a concentrated form of spirit. Now, that alcohol has a concentration of over 98%. That concentration is not fit for human consumption. Even when they decided that we're going to use sanitizers to kill the COVID virus, or COVID, they said no, 60% is enough, right? So 98 is quite high. So for human consumption, what a manufacturer does is that they dilute it by what we call a dilution factor, right? So, for example, you'll find that these spirits are, let's say, 30% or 40%, as per the standard, 40% alcohol. So what they do is they get the 98 and they add some amount of water so that it comes from 98 to 40. Now, when you add water, so if you have 10,000 liters of the concentrated thing, the ethyl alcohol, if you have 10,000 liters, And maybe if you want to bring it 40% and you do the mathematics, you might say, I need, let's say, 20,000 liters of water. Now, at the end of that process, it is highly likely that you're going to have 30,000 liters, right? You're going to have 30,000 liters. Following the law of conservation of mass, or what we call mass balance, you will find that what you put in should be the same as what comes at the end in absolute terms. Now, sometimes we know, because our processes are inefficient, you're going to have a bit of loss. Maybe the boy you told to stand on the line did not stand there, and some of the alcohol spilled out. So instead of having 30,000, you might have maybe 28,000. But that is on the higher side. Instead of having 30,000, you'll have 28,000. Now, what some unscrupulous manufacturers, and which is quite unfortunate, or some non-compliant taxpayers will say, instead of declaring the 28,000, I'll declare only 20,000. So you have an 8,000 that is not declared for tax purposes, especially excise duty and value-added tax. Now, when we come in to study the process, we do what we call, sometimes what we call trial runs. So we go through the process, we tell you, okay, bring the raw material, put it into the system, let it go through the production process, what comes out on the other end. And we are noting down every step of the way. We note the efficiency, we note how much has been lost. And because of the fundamental nature of the laws of science, we shall be able to find out that 8,000 has not been declared for tax purposes. And we have done this and used this over a decade or so.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. I will get back to you, certainly. I will get back to you so that you can demonstrate how does this benefit me as a manufacturer, or how does it benefit a sector, if you're talking about distillers, or if you're talking about another manufacturing sector, let's say the steel industry, or whatever sector, how does it benefit them as a sector? But most importantly, how does it benefit the public? Whatever you do, does it benefit the public, and in what ways? But I'll get back to you on that. I now want to focus my attention to John here, my left. John, you talked about laboratory services. Our viewers out there might want to know what laboratory services are in URA. Most of us, when we talk about laboratories, we think about when we fall sick and, the doctor sends us to the laboratory. Go to the lab and they do some checks. So some people might wonder, is that the kind of service that you provide at URA? Is it part of your, giving back to the public? You have laboratory services. So please just put us into the picture of what you mean by laboratory services at URA, and probably how does this fit into tax administration?
Thank you, Isaac. Coming from a side of how dynamic business is, one of the science tools which the Revenue Authority thought is relevant for such a time and age is a science laboratory. Basically, a laboratory which is able to determine composition and identification of items. And this serves majorly the customs and to another extent the domestic taxes. But what happens? When we think of how items are these days, you have, let me use an example of textile materials. you look at the textile material and you wonder what fiber is it made of. And the kind of fibers it is made of has a bearing on the value it has at customs and thus the tax it should pay. Or you think about chemicals brought in to be used for purposes like manufacturing, and you think, okay, what is this chemical exactly? Because it has a bearing on how it is classified at customs and what duties are chargeable. So in order not to have subjectivity, maybe someone using their experience will say, no, when I touch this item or this textile, in my opinion, I feel it is cotton. So please, the importer, you have to pay so much tax. The laboratory is there to give an objective view of what items are. For example, if there is, a speculation or a disagreement, the importer is saying, no, for my brought in polyester. And then the customs office has the opinion that, no, I think this is cotton or a mixture of polyester and cotton. The science laboratory will carry out the analysis and resolve such kind of issue. So it is basically done to arrive at what is the correct identification, what is the correct material composition, and then you have the right assessment of value and the right import duty to be applied to that item.
Okay, that is quite interesting. So, in other words, you're saying that the laboratory services are to do with items that are imported, identifying the items that have been imported and ensuring that they are properly classified.
Yes, majorly.
Majorly.
Yes.
So if you say major, then that means you also probably look into other issues, other items which are not necessarily imported items. Is that true?
Yes, that is possible, though to a lesser extent. I'll give an example. Say, internally maybe, there is a procurement of an item and we want to validate that actually this item meets the set specifications which the authority wants. It can still be brought to the laboratory and we do that work. Or it can also be an issue related to what Stephen was talking about earlier. This product is maybe identified as say a spirit and not, let me say, a beer. So, because the two have different tax treatments, say for excise duty, so you will probably bring it to the laboratory to carry out maybe analysis on that. So it depends on what issue is coming up, but the major services to the customs to deal with imported items.
Okay. Imported items.
Yes.
So can you maybe just briefly talk about the types of imported items that undergo testing in the lab, and why so? Why? Because I believe not everything that is imported goes to the lab. So many of the viewers, I'm sure, import cars and that kind of thing. So I don't know whether cars go to the lab to check them before they pay their taxes. So just let us know what kind of items undergo testing in the lab and why those particular items.
Okay. Usually, the analysis is done with a main objective of one, identification, or determination of material composition. So if you can look at an item and straight away say, this is what it is. For example, this is a phone, this is a watch, that one will not require to come to the laboratory unless there is a certain specific interest. However, if you look at an item like textiles or clothes for that matter, we are able to see this is a shirt. However, the tax is to be computed on the basis of what material is it made of. And if there is a dilemma about what material it is made of, then that item will come to the laboratory. Or if you look at another item, let me say it is presented as a white powder, it is not well labeled, and somebody cannot tell what exactly it is, despite whichever way it has been declared. Then we need to carry out tests to identify what is it exactly. So such an item will also be brought to the lab. The other thing which I would think about is there are materials where you have all goods which can be presented in different forms or status. Let me give an example of palm oil products. Palm oil can be presented as a crude palm oil. It can be presented as a crude palm oil. It can be presented as an intermediate product, maybe which has been bleached. Or it can even be presented as a ready-to-use, like the real refined oil which is to be used in the cooking. However, the contention might be, what is it? Maybe the importer declared it as, let me say, crude palm oil, but the customs officer thinks it is maybe a fraction, or lean, that's what it is called. So we shall carry out the analysis to ascertain what exactly it is. Is it really the crude palm oil, or it is a fraction of the palm oil? So that is where we shall really, determine whether the analysis will be done. When we have a dilemma about the composition and a dilemma about the identity of the item. If there is no such dilemma, then we are not really so much into carrying out the analysis.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. But John, could you give us maybe, when you talk about crude palm oil and not so many people probably relate. How about a simpler example, something that, we can relate to?
Okay. The other example which we may use, I will use the example of cocoa powder. Cocoa powder which does not contain any sugar added is taxed at 0% import duty. If it has sugar added, it has a higher duty rate. So the risk there is somebody bringing in cocoa powder which has sugar added and declaring it as cocoa powder without sugar added. So we shall carry out analysis in the lab to confirm, is it having sugar added or not? And then if you think of one of the common items we have on the importation are textiles. Let me go back to that example. Textiles made of man-made fibers such as polyester, nylon, and the like, they have in the past had a lower customs value than textiles which are made of natural fibers such as cotton, wool, silk, and the like. So the contention will be, or the risk there is somebody bringing in a textile made of cotton or made of wool or silk, and then they declare it as a textile made of man-made fibers such as polyester, so that they can have the benefit of a lower customs value. So the lab will come in, since science is very objective. If it's a polyester, the analysis will reveal that it's a polyester, and otherwise, if it's a cotton, the analysis will surely reveal that it is cotton, because if there are two truths, then they cannot contradict really.
Okay, thank you, John. Stephen, back to you. We left something hanging. Something to do with the benefits. As you carry out your compliance checks with these manufacturers, does it benefit the individual manufacturer? does it benefit a sector, a group of manufacturers within that sector, and does it benefit the general public?
Thank you, Isaac. I think unlike any other service that we offer, we have seen that the benefits arrive, to use the term arrive there and then. There is some form of mutual benefit. First to the authority, and of course the general public, because when we do these compliance checks and the right tax is arrived at or paid, then we have a bigger kitty to pick from as government and as a country, right? So there's more tax, and to the extent or by extension, you will find that as more tax is paid, or as a fair share of tax is paid, as a fair share of tax is paid, all of us will pay little. If everyone pays their fair share, it's highly likely that all of us will pay little rather than just a few paying much more. Now, like I did mention, we usually find that as we go on to conduct these studies within within the different manufacturing entities, that we help, one, the business people or the manufacturers to understand their businesses better. Of course, there are those highly efficient, well-run entities that understand the business from the A's to the Z's. But there are people who are starting up, especially startups or upstarts, or now what I think they call cottage industry players, right? All they want to see is my raw material and my output, and then they sort of measure value that way. But when we go on, we usually tell them, look here, you are a mattress manufacturer, your process is this efficient today, you're losing about 5% of your production, but it's highly likely that if you provided temperature controls, you're going to lose less of your raw material, and that will translate into more product, and therefore high sales. Again, using the same industry, there are players you find may not be aware that actually the waste from the mattresses can be sold and generates value. So because of our experience over time, we then can advise them that way. The other thing that we've usually experienced is after we've conducted these studies, the players can trace and track their value creators. By value creators, I usually like to say raw material, but also your human resource, right? So we have found some loopholes. I'll use the same example of loss. You will find that as we do the study, the trial runs, or what we call in standard language trial production runs, that a certain human resource is not maybe present or as efficient as it ought to be, and therefore there is higher loss than there is, right? Or you will find that the manufacturer doesn't know exactly to the dot how much 1 kilogram of sugar will be present in a kilogram of, let's say, icing sugar, right? So after we're done with the study, we put all the facts on table. We have an engagement with the production managers, with the owners of the businesses. And it is more likely than not that you will find people saying, wow, we didn't know that. You know? Over time, of course, people will call you and they will thank you, okay, you helped us with the business. I remember an experience we had with one wines manufacturer as you head to Ginger. And she didn't really have the understanding of what creates value. After we're done with the study, the way she handled her containers or her packaging material was way better than she did. She was more, she understood better that packaging material actually is a very important value driver for my business. And I think a year later, she came back here and she has trained in computing what we call input-output coefficients.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. That is encouraging. I mean, to know that it's not only about the tax, about how much can be squeezed or maybe got from a manufacturer. But I think I also need to add. You see, you're talking about manufacturers, and if you are a manufacturer, then we as the public, we support your business because we are the ones who come and buy your products. And I think the biggest corporate social responsibility that you can undertake as a manufacturer would be to pay your taxes.
Definitely.
It would be to pay your taxes. So if your taxes correctly, but also to be sure that I mean you do your thing the right way. You are efficient. That means you can produce more. That means you can sell more. That means you can give back more to the public through paying taxes, right?
Definitely. The other one, I think, and this is a conversation I think we're having internally, that provides general value for everyone, public good really. In India, they are doing something that is similar to what we are doing, the input-output coefficients. They like to call them norms. So they have set a standard, and so it's sort of an efficiency standard, whereby they say that as a person who produces soda, we hold you to this level of efficiency. If you don't meet it, then this preferential treatment, these incentives may not be available to you. Now, what every manufacturer does is that they'll try and meet that efficiency. Now, the broad effect of the efficiency gains translate into more productive capacity, they translate into more standardized products, and by extension, it affects the pricing. Because the more you produce, the more value you generate, you have wiggle room. You have room. You have wiggle room. You can have room to play around with your pricing. You can bring it a bit lower than if your production costs are that high.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Our viewers, please, if you have any comments, any questions that you would want to pass on to the panelists, please use the chat facility in Zoom. As long as the question is related to the topic that we are discussing, I believe we shall be the panelists will be able to address your questions or your concerns or any clarifications that you might need. Please use the Q&A section for that purpose. We shall be pleased and glad to hear from you. Let me switch to Solomon. Solomon, you in your introduction you talked about disposals, destructions. Someone wonders, disposals, destructions, what are you destroying? What are you disposing of?
Well, thank you, Isaac. This is disposals is one of the service renderings of the science unit, and by disposals we are looking at items that are not fit for the intended use. We give an example: somebody brought rice, but maybe during transit it got water soaked, because we've had many of these items getting water soaked. So what happens is that he brought it to sell it, but now that it is water soaked, it is no longer fit for human consumption. So what does the trader do? He has spent money and he has to account for it. So as the science unit, we come in to advise, let's say, customs or domestic taxes, because depending on who is requesting, our clients are mainly customs and domestic taxes. So depending on who is requesting, we are able to go ahead and advise accordingly on the modes of disposal. Yeah. So ideally, we are protecting, one, revenue leakage. Then secondly, we are looking at protecting the environment. Then also we are looking at health and safety of the public when we are doing these disposals. So in this whole process, we are giving a scientific eye to the operational departments, mainly customs and domestic taxes.
Okay. Just to put this into context, so you're saying I am an importer.
Yes.
I brought in a consignment of rice.
Yes.
The rice got a problem in transit.
Yes.
It is no longer fit for consumption, human consumption,
Yes.
but it has arrived.
Yes.
And you're saying that I certainly spent money to buy it.
Yes.
Probably I've even paid taxes. At what stage? Have I paid taxes or I haven't paid taxes, or either way?
Either way.
Okay, so we imagine I've imported, I've duly paid my duty on the rice, then the rice under storage in my warehouse gets contaminated, no longer fit for human consumption, and I will need to destroy it. So I'm trying to draw parallels between the role that is played here and the role that is played by UNBS. Because if we talk about it's not fit for human consumption, is it because of the tax element that your role will come through? Just to let the viewers understand the different roles. Because someone might think that you're talking about consumption, human consumption, and what, and we have UNBS maybe to address that issue. So why does science at URA come into the picture?
Thank you, Isaac. A very interesting question. But ideally, our role as science is to look at the tax element, which is the revenue leakage. But I should also say that we do not work in silos. In most cases, when we are working, we work with UNBS alongside. So it's not an issue of the science unit only. So you will always have, let's say, customs, then you also have UNBS, in this case, if it is rice, then you also have the science unit. Now, in this case, you're looking at the mode of disposal. Mode of disposal is ideally supposed to be the mandate of NEMA. However, NEMA has delegated the function just to allow us facilitate our taxpayers better. NEMA has delegated that function to the science unit of URA. So in this case, we are mainly looking at the environment and the revenue. Then the other bit of fitness and what is handled by UNBS. So our role is to look at quantities, what are the values, and to ensure that actually this rice is disposed of.
Oh, okay. Solomon, I get it, because you're talking about the quantities, you're talking about the values, you're talking about the tax refund. So, and this is something that UNBS wouldn't be able to do.
Yes.
Okay, so that clearly brings a clear distinction between the two functions.
Yes.
Okay, now Solomon, another issue. URA being the first point of contact for all goods that are coming into the country. Tell us, is there a role that is played? Because you see, when a person is bringing in items, I think they are governed by certain statutes. There are certain do's and don'ts. But unless if there's someone who is in position to detect the don'ts, especially in what you cannot bring in, what is not permissible, and that kind of thing. And of course, I from what you said, my feeling is that if what I've brought in is not permissible, there must be some element of handling it, because it is already here. So can you briefly tell us from what you do, what exactly is the role that you scientists play in that kind of scenario? No taxes are going to be paid, because eventually it will not progress to, to either consumption or to the market and that kind of thing. So briefly give us that role played by the scientists in that scenario.
Thank you, Isaac. We have, when we look at these scenarios, items come in, for example, for customs purposes, and in most cases, customs is everywhere. So, one, we are going to rely on customs because they are the first people who receive these goods. And we expect them to alert us. We've had instances where we've had items imported like with let's say dangerous chemicals. Now, as the chemist, as the science unit, we have the responsibility of liaising with other regulatory agencies. Say the Atomic Agency, NEMA, UNBS, name all those other regulatory agencies, because the kind of items that we are receiving are diverse. And that means that we are working with very many regulatory agencies. Now, our role as science, when contacted by or requested by customs or domestic taxes, is to liaise and try to make sure that these items are correctly handled. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Solomon. Some interesting questions are coming through, but before we go into those ones, just allow me to come back to Stephen. Stephen, in your explanation, when we were talking about the benefits, because I am really very much interested in knowing, and the public out there will also be interested in knowing the benefits. You told us about the benefits to the manufacturer, because you can let them know about their processing efficiencies and give advice on how and where to improve. So let's come to the sector. Let's come to the sector. If we are this group of manufacturers producing the same items, those interventions you're talking about, how do they help out? How do they play into the dynamics for a sector to benefit?
Thank you, Isaac. I think when I was trying to elaborate on the benefits of the taxpayer, I then didn't pull it up to the level of the sector. But to bundle up the very many answers to that question, what usually we see and what some of the people we've worked with during the studies have told us that is that when we, for example, do a sector campaign, a compliance campaign targeting a certain sector, they've told us that they find that it levels the playing field. So to sort of explain that better, again, if you are 4 people in a sector, and let's say you're doing soda, or you're producing soda, and one of you is not compliant fully, is not paying the right amount of tax because they are under declaring their sales, or they are over claiming on raw materials. Because there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either say, because I am bringing in this much, I am producing this much, my chargeable income is going to reduce. So the more you increase your raw materials or your cost of production, your chargeable income reduces. You can flip it then also to say that I'm only producing this little. Now, if you're not paying the right amount of tax, it's highly likely that you're going to try and compete on price, because you have that saving, and you can say, instead of my customers paying 1,000 shillings for a bottle of water, because I haven't paid tax on this much amount, of my sales, I'll let them pay 900. Now you undercut the other players within the sector. So that sort of cutthroat competition will drive other people out of the sector, will kill business, and at the end of the day, it creates monopolies, which are not good for the economy. So if we go into a sector and we improve or enhance compliance within that sector, the manifest outcome is that everyone now gets to compete fairly. So this other advantage of, I can sell at 900 shillings and you are selling at 1,000, therefore I'm going to undercut you, does not, we sort of try to eliminate it, and we've seen positive outcomes from that.
Okay, so basically, eventually we have a sector growth, rather than having, and I think it also helps with the general compliance in the sector.
Yes, that's spot on. It helps with the general compliance, because now they know, or the players know, that URA is watching. Not only that, they also have the capacity. What has been happening is that people know that we have these traditional audits. I'll come in and look at, using my accounting standards, and I look at your depreciation, I'll look at all those things that are catered for within accounting standards. But those standards, to some extent, do not really capture the value drivers. So what science does, especially within a manufacturing context, it looks at the real value drivers. What are the raw materials? What process do they undergo, and what is the outcome? When we balance that up, it is highly likely that we are going to get the right production and you're going to pay the right tax.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Our participants or the viewers of this session, we have a question, and I think I will throw it to John. One of the participants, this is Sylvia. Sylvia says that I just ordered baby milk from USA for my infant's consumption. Does it go through lab testing too? And John, I think this kind of question from Sylvia, I think it if I could put it in another context, I think there are 2 things. Number one, does everything undergo testing? I think that one you tried to explain.
No.
That not everything undergoes testing. Then I think it also has an issue to do with standards. Is this baby? I think she's concerned. Is this baby milk the rightful, is it good for my baby's consumption? So she's trying to ask, does it go through testing? And probably if it does go through testing, is that the kind of result that you'll be able to give? And I think you will be able to talk about the role that you play as laboratory services in URA and the roles that are played by other agencies of the government. So please, the floor is yours. Let's get Sylvia an answer to that question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sylvia, for the question. Certainly, as mentioned earlier, not everything which is imported is tested. And if the concern is about fitness for consumption or issues related to standards of products, that is in the mandate of the Uganda National Bureau of Standards. However, I would mention that if, for example, this item which is declared as baby milk, there is to a certain extent reason to think that maybe it is not or it is something else. In that case, we can still go ahead and check what is it. However, if it's just declared as baby milk and it is evident it is baby milk, then there is no need to test it. Maybe I would mention also that say an item is presented and there is reason or a risk identified that it could be, say, a precursor for something like chemical weapons, then the Revenue Authority will pick interest in such thing. As mentioned earlier, customs is the first place for everything coming in. So for security reasons and such interest, such item will be still brought to see what it is. Is it a precursor for chemical weapons or not? So such role related to security and safety can still come in regard to the work done by the lab. So if it's an issue of standards, basically that is in the docket of the Uganda National Bureau of Standards. Certainly there are other agencies also playing different roles depending on the issue at hand which is to be answered.
Well, okay. That is good feedback. I hope Sylvia picks a thing or two on that issue. But again, John, of course, the questions that have been coming through. One of the participants asked whether cars are among the products that go to the lab, and I think that one we answered. Not necessarily. Cars do not. Apart from if there's anything peculiar that might require that kind of eye, which requires lab analysis. Then there's a question again here. One of the participants said that I see a conflict with UNBS. Does it mean after the lab check, then I have to go to UNBS again for a quality assurance? I do think that offices should be closed, such as the chain of a one-stop center like at KCCA City Hall. Again, I think, John, briefly you can talk about the perceived conflict,
okay,
so that we put this issue to rest.
Yeah. Thank you, Isaac, and thank you for that question. Certainly, I would say or affirm that there is no conflict. The two institutions have distinct mandates.
UNBS looking at the standards and quality assurance for the items, and URA's interest is in the side of revenue collection and other mandate of control prohibited items and the like. But let me talk about it in the context of revenue collection. As I mentioned earlier, the analysis which is done in the revenue lab is aimed at what is the right or fair tax treatment for this item, because that tax treatment is premised on the identity or the material composition of the item. So if you think of even the parameters or the tests which UNBS will do, you will find that they are different because the questions you are answering are regarding this item are totally different. Let me maybe use an example. UNBS may carry out a test on tiles to check whether these tiles are suitable for use. Maybe their strength or they will not harm someone when they walk on them, things like that. Whereas URA's interest will be what class of tile is this, so that it can give it the right value and assess the rightful tax. So in that case, the other one is looking at fitness for use, whereas here you are looking at the tax which should be paid rightfully. So the mandates are actually different.
I just wanted to add something.
Thank you, John. Stephen, you want to add something to that?
Of course, what John says is quite right. There is a difference in mandate, and the mandates are very clear and distinct. However, we have tried over time to create relationships and to create synergies between UNBS and URA. We have an MOU with UNBS, and we share testing capacity nonetheless, despite the differences in mandate. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. And I think in that same context, trying to get the two arguments into the same setting. We have an MOU. We share some capacities and that kind of thing. John, laboratory services. If I am a member of the public,
Yes.
and probably I had something that I needed to test, probably for quality issues. Maybe I'm a manufacturer. I need to start manufacturing, and maybe I need to know what is the implication of this in terms of taxes or for purposes of quality. Or so basically, are the laboratory services open to the public? Can you share some insight into that aspect, because we are here listening in and you're talking about laboratory services?
Okay, thank you, Isaac. Right now, there is a provision for the facility we call advanced ruling. Advanced ruling is if I may put it simply, someone wants to import a certain item and they want to find out what will be the treatment at customs if I've imported this item. So they will bring in their sample, we shall run analysis on it and then give an opinion, and customs will be able to advise them. That is for item to be imported, we can give advanced ruling before the items come. However, for the domestic context, that is something we are actually projecting for the future. Right now, it's not yet opened up that maybe somebody who has their product out can bring for analysis. It's not yet opened up, but it is something which is being prepared and worked upon, because there are many things involved in there. And that is a platform which is being forecast for the future.
Okay, thank you, John. I have a question here to the panelists from Agnes. Agnes is asking, what are the main risks in the manufacturing sector that URA should watch out for from the science perspective? What are the main risks in the manufacturing sector that URA should watch out for from the science perspective? Stephen, how do you answer that?
That's a good question. Indeed, it would have been a huge disservice if we left, if we finished the webinar without addressing that. First, let me try and put it sort of twofold. First, or number one, there are risks that are prevalent, that there are risks that are with us, and then there are also what seemingly are emerging risks that might be on the horizon. They're happening elsewhere, and we see them coming from the science perspective. But number one, if I am at customs, when we have done our studies, we found that there seems to be a diversion of raw materials. Now, you will understand that for certain manufacturers, they import raw materials under preferential treatment. So if you import raw materials for the production of, let's say, beer, or production of let's say mattresses, or any other item, you might import them under customs procedure code 450, 452, or 453. Now that provides some rebates on duty, or sometimes, for example, CPC 450, you will not pay duty and things like that. So what happens is that if I am a manufacturer, I might say I'm bringing in 1,000 units to produce my goods. Or I'm bringing, let me put it even more practically, I'm bringing in 10,000 tons of inputs for me to produce items that I'm going to either sell on the local market or even export. Now, what I will do, I know there are other players within my sector. They don't have the capacity to import those items. So what I will do of the items, of the raw materials that I have imported and declared and treated to preferential treatment, let's say under CPC 450, I'll take a portion of that and I will sell them as they are in their raw form, right? In the alternate case, what I have sold on the raw market, on the local market, should have paid duty and any other attendant taxes. Now, there are people who run that scheme for years. Now, when we go in to do an input-output coefficient study, or we do our production trial runs, we find that you said you imported 10,000 tons, but the goods that you're producing can only be produced by, let's say 5,000 tons. So there's another 5,000 tons of raw materials that you're selling on the domestic market, and therefore you are abusing the preferential treatment that has been accorded to you as a manufacturer. Therefore, you ought to pay tax on, of course, because it's an offense. Therefore, you have to pay penalties on those items that you have diverted. The other one is on duty drawback. I think if you are in the manufacturing sector, you understand duty drawback. This is sort of like duty remission. If you produce goods locally and you export them, the government, in a way of trying to promote exportation or export for known benefits, will give you the duty you paid when you're bringing in the raw materials that produce those goods. Right? Now, there are unscrupulous taxpayers or manufacturers who claim that I have exported 10,000, let's say, kilograms of, let's say, icing sugar or wheat, and therefore I should be paid duty on the 10,000. But when you go in to verify, you'll find that actually the gentleman or the lady for gender equality, they exported only 5,000. So in that case, you have a loss on the refunds that you're providing these people who claim to have exported much more than they actually did. The one that is emerging from a customs perspective, from the science view of things, is abuse of rules of origin. So because we are in the East African community, there is provision for the non-payment of duty on items or goods that come from this region. So if I have, if I'm importing, let's say, clinker, for those that manufacture cement, I will pay zero duty on that clinker, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there are instances where the items that are imported from the region actually do not meet the criteria for having originated from the region. The rules of origin, or the rules like they call it, I think Rule 4 or 3, thereabout, provides a criteria on what will be termed as having originated from within East Africa, right? So if I bring in, let's say, rice, which is a very contentious issue, from Pakistan, but then I declare it as having come from Tanzania, I'll not pay duty on that rice. Now, that means that I am costing the revenue body, that I am not paying my fair share of revenue that I ought to have paid. Now, I've had a discussion with a few people from customs, and they indicate now there has been a scheme to move those things through Egypt to within the region. And Egypt runs an export promotion program that, to the extent possible, they will provide you with a certificate of origin. A certificate of origin is a document that says, look here, these goods come from Egypt, even when, to a great extent, they don't meet the criteria of origin. To put it simply, a certificate of origin would be like a birth certificate that says that, let me use Solomon, that Solomon is John's son. But Solomon actually is not John's son. You know, he's just being smuggled into the family. So he starts to enjoy the benefits of the family, yet he doesn't merit those benefits, right? Now, from a domestic tax perspective, the schemes or the fraud or the risks we are seeing really stem majorly from overstatement of raw materials or the cost of raw materials, and then understating your production. We recently have been handling a sector that deals with consumables. And when you look at their books of accounts, they're very proper. If you use our traditional audit methods, you will scarcely come up with a flaw. You'll not find an issue with them. But we discovered that actually they were playing around with their losses. So they will say that we are losing 5% of our production. Now, 5% seems like a very small loss if you're using cottage industry thinking. But for someone who produces goods worth trillions, turnover trillions of shillings, if you're losing 5%, that is a whole lot of value that is being lost. So when we did the study, actually, we found that instead of a loss, actually, because of the production process, this person gains. You understand? So when we look at the books with their production records, we ask them, okay, you lose 5% of your raw materials. Now, and they said the loss is almost, the losses we looked at included stones. Eh? You know, when you bring in, let's say, grain, there are stones. So they do this stoning. So, you lose like, let's say, 5 million kilograms of stones. Do you have a pile of those stones around the factory premises so that we can see them? They started to scratch their head. So at the end of the day, we realized that they were not paying the right amount of tax, and they had actually to pay. The other risk, of course, is abuse of policy provisions. Again, from the domestic tax perspective, it's at customs, but also in domestic tax. The more prevalent form of that today is trying to find a way around not registering for DTS. Because DTS is such a potent compliance enhancing tool, those that have been in the game of evading tax through underdeclaring their sales are now looking for ways of how to underreport, of how to avoid being under the DTS scheme. So what they do, DTS has come up with products that are supposed to be registered for DTS. So that part of that includes wines, beers, and spirits. So someone will say, before I was marketing as a wine, but because DTS is now going to start tracking me, let me register as, let's say, a kombucha, which really falls within the gray areas of wine. Is it a wine? Is it a beer? And it's not really that clearly defined. So when we do our input-output analysis, we ask the person, but what you're calling a wine, what you're calling a kombucha is actually wine. We had the case of a certain beer, or what was then a beer. It was calling itself a beer, but all they did was to get spirit, the ethyl alcohol I talked about, the strong one, put in water and maybe a bit of sweetening. So those are the risks that we are seeing, and someone has to be very careful if you're working in the domestic tax department or customs area, to make sure that those do not fall through the cracks. What we are doing now is to be more forward-looking, to try and tease out those risks that we see are on the horizon, rather than our clients, that those departments coming to us, so we warn them beforehand. Yes.
Well, okay. Thank you, Steve. But before I leave you, you've touched on that issue of the DTS.
Yes.
It's quite an interesting topic, and of course, we know originally I think we had about 4 products covered, and now
we have cement.
We're going to add on a few more, and probably in future we might see even many more, coming on board. Now, someone might argue that since we have the DTS, and we know that it is hardly possible for, that is, if we have totally honest people who will make sure that each and every unit of production actually gets stamped and it gets recognized under the DTS scheme. So the argument would be, we cannot underdeclare sales because of DTS. And again, now coming back to the issue of the risks, where would the risk shift? Would that mean that what you do for purposes of input-output will no longer be relevant?
Okay. I think that's a nice one. I don't know whether answering it will then tickle the very creative brains of those that are perpetrating these evasion schemes. But like I did mention, that we have 2 ends of the equation. There is the raw material end, and there is the output end. Now, if you have looked at the output end, if I am that steeped in evasion or crime, if I am willfully committing this evasion, then I'll shift my game to the inputs, to the inputs end. And what I will do, like I said, will be to overstate my inputs. The other one would be playing around the laws. I know there are limits to the laws, otherwise you report to the revenue body if that loss occasions. But remember that the coverage is not as optimal as we might want it to be. But also, someone will just hit those thresholds every time they report the threshold, even when they have lost, they should have lost less than what the threshold is. The other thing is, DTS is a very potent compliance enhancement tool, but and I think you've been reading the newspapers. There are people who are trying to find a way around it. You know, so there will always be one or two loopholes or gaps, or those very strong-headed evaders. So that's how we come in as science, to make sure that we improve further the enforcement regime and the monitoring regime that is incidental to DTS.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen, for enlightening us on some of the risks that are within the manufacturing sector. Now I want to come back to you, Solomon. Questions are coming in, and some are similar in nature, so I'll try to put them together, and we'll see how you can address them. Our participants, there's one Mr. Mugabe who seeks to know about these disposals, the downgrading, and probably the impact on loss reduction. I recall from what you said earlier, you talked about what comes in, customs.
Yes.
It has issues, it needs to be put away.
Yes.
So you step in and you give advice, and you rightly mentioned that you are an extension of NEMA. You mandated to do certain things.
Yes.
On behalf of NEMA.
Yes.
Otherwise, NEMA someone would have to be sent to NEMA.
To NEMA, yes.
Go to NEMA and you get a certificate from NEMA. So all that is now in-house.
Yes.
That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Perfect. Now, I am, and probably some people might not know this. If I'm a business person, I am in wholesale and retail. I have a whole batch of stock which has gone bad. It has gone bad. I can't sell it anymore. But I've put money into it.
Yes.
So the role that you play, how does it impact on my tax payment?
Okay.
For that matter? If you can just enlighten us a bit on the role in as far as that component or aspect is concerned.
Thank you, Isaac. Our role, first and foremost, is to ensure that the correct taxes are paid. And how do we do that? You're coming up, first and foremost, if you have goods that you cannot sell, for example, on the market, it is your right to write to the tax body through your domestic tax office. Now, the domestic tax office will always communicate to us. Now, our response will be to come and look at the goods. Are they actually expired? Are they damaged? That is one thing that we do, and we do it with your tax office. So, ideally, goods for disposal can be put off in two ways. One, we can destroy them completely, as in you cannot use them for anything else. And for that, you'll get all the credit. Your stock, that would be a bad stock, which will be written off. Now, some items will be put to alternative use. If I can give an example of recently we got a request to dispose of toilet paper, and the owner was insisting to have it destroyed completely. However, we realized that we could salvage some tax from this whole process if you put the toilet paper to alternative use, because the toilet paper could be recycled maybe to trays of eggs or things like that. So our recommendation was put the toilet paper to alternative use. Now, what is the effect of that? The issue here is that we do not lose all the value. So if, let's say, the toilet paper was at, let's say, 10,000, for example, we would salvage the value to, let's say, 5,000, because this can be used as a raw material of another industry. So in most cases, so ideally the goods that we destroy are either we consider them as bad stock, or we could salvage the value. Instead of having a bad stock of 10,000, you have a bad stock of 5,000. But also, there are items that we completely destroy. Give an example of rice, for example. It has come in, water soaked, and aflatoxin levels are too high. We cannot even recommend it for animal feed. We shall just destroy it completely, because even the animals need to be protected. So in most cases, it's on a case-by-case basis, first and foremost, and our recommendations are based on the information that is available to us. So in most cases, we are working closely with the lab, the UNBS lab, even our in-house lab, if we have capacity to do the tests. But in most cases, we are relying on UNBS, since it's directly their mandate. Environmental protection, yes, we are looking at what is the best mode of disposal. Are you going to get chemicals and just landfill them? So our recommendations are based on what item we are recommending for disposal. And this is a function that is delegated to us by NEMA. And being the science unit of URA, NEMA has trust in us. And we work closely with them, because we've gotten items which we are not so sure of how to destroy, and they have given us advice. So this function, we don't do it alone, but we do it in liaison with national NEMA, National Environment Management Authority. On the issue of loss reduction, ideally this is more of damaged stock. This is stock basically, and the taxpayer has a right to it's an allowable deduction in their final accounts. So in most cases, it is reducing on the gross profit. It is reducing on the gross profit, and that is where our interest is. I will give you an example. We've had cases which have been very interesting. 2 years ago, we had a case of one of the publishers who had books, obsolete books, for disposal. worth about $1 billion. However, when we said we want to see where the books are, he never came back. Then recently, still another publisher had obsolete books worth $1 billion still, but on verification, it was only about 500 million. So we've had cases which warrant us actually going and verifying. We have also handled cases where you find a manufacturer is incurring losses in production. However, he's saying these goods expired from the what? From the warehouse. It becomes, the treatment of these items is different. Ideally, any losses in production are supposed to be handled under the cost of sales. Now, anything that expires in the warehouse is supposed to be handled as a bad stock. Now, this is a situation where somebody is accounting for goods in production as first of all, he accounts for it in the cost of sales. Now, on top of that, he's also declaring it as a bad stock, which was more of a double deduction. We've had it for some of the beer companies, and that we have actually rectified. So that's kind of the value that we are adding in this whole thing, and I think it's one of the areas that is really neglected, and going forward we are going to put a lot of emphasis in it. How do you even come up to say that these goods are bad stock? Because we have realized there's a lot of revenue leakage in that area that we need to plug up.
Okay. Thank you, Solomon. Thank you, Solomon, for that insight. Stephen, I want to turn back to you. You know, when we talk about manufacturing, it's a very core topic in so many aspects, and that is why I don't want to leave certain things, So you will excuse me when I keep throwing a few things to you, and of course from some of the feedback that I'm getting, I believe that there are certain things that you can address. Manufacturing, as a country, there's a deliberate policy, and there are efforts to make sure that we go the manufacturing way. We add value through manufacturing, processing, and that kind of thing. And we have also seen a big influx of the foreigners who have come here, and they are doing they're doing manufacturing. So investors, our investors, some benefited from a regime of tax holidays and what, and there are things that we as a nation we anticipate to benefit from their joining the fray here, doing this and that. Number one, of course, being that we shall have produce here, so that means we shall reduce on our imports, so that balance of payments, we shall save on some of the money that we have been spending out there. But of course, importantly, we shall employ people in those factories, and also give market to our raw materials. Yeah, because the raw materials will be through value addition, we shall be able to do something. And certainly, if we are exporting some of the products, again, we shall be benefiting. But when it comes to issues of compliance in the manufacturing sector, you mentioned that there are certain things that you will not necessarily detect through a normal financial audit, where you simply look at the financials, with the balance sheet, with the PR, profit and loss, or the statement of income. So science steps in. So let me ask, at what point, if let's say I am an auditor in domestic taxes, because these taxpayers are domiciled in different areas. You are a large taxpayer, you are a medium, and you have your tax office somewhere. That's your first point of contact, and these are the people who will be auditing you regularly, as and when the need, So if I'm an auditor in domestic taxes, and I'm auditing this manufacturer, at what point do I come in? Or at what point do I seek the services of the scientist, so that, we come to the bottom of, everything, rather than looking at the surface? At what point do I seek that assistance? Or at what point do I use those services you talked about, the IOCs? So if you were to speak to an auditor, what is it that you would tell that auditor?
Okay, first, let me first speak to the importance of the manufacturing sector. I think the most recent and more comprehensive statistics indicate that manufacturing, I think, brought in about $459 billion in investment in sub-Saharan Africa. Uganda has now a very well drawn out industrial policy. So we are more intent and more structured to develop that sector. You've seen that the number of industries have shot up. So what does that say? That says that the manufacturing sector is going to become very important. It's going to become a very important cog in the wheel that we call the Ugandan economy. So that means as a revenue body, we have to be watchful and develop capacity to make sure that that sector returns the optimal tax that it ought to return. As an auditor, it means that if you're interfacing with a taxpayer who falls within the category of a manufacturer, you need to hold them to a level of importance that you haven't held them before, because at the end of the day, our measure, which is the tax to GDP ratio, measure of performance for URA, or even as a country, the tax to GDP ratio will quite significantly be affected by the outcome of the audit, or aggregately the audits of that sector. Now, to come to what an auditor ought to do in case they are in the process of auditing a manufacturer. I am seated in the large taxpayer's office, I am seated in the medium taxpayer's office, I am seated in Metropolitan, or what now they call CAC. What the practice has been is that the auditors go to the taxpayer, they do the first meetings and the visits. And thereafter, as they are conducting the audit, they come across a challenge, usually of a technical nature, and then they refer the case through the normal administrative procedure. Maybe a manager writes to the assistant commissioner, and assistant commissioner TID, and the assistant commissioner TID then sends it down to the teams that do the science audits, of course, through the manager science. However, I think because there was realization that this collaborative nature of work yields more output than the typical traditional send memo to so and so, and and it gets down to the audits. We've had efforts such as the joint compliance audit, where you have a team that sits together, that sits together, and then they do a 360 view of a taxpayer, in this case of a manufacturer, right? So that at the end of the day, that audit represents the accounting, typical traditional accounting audit procedures, and those to do with science. Now, if again I am an auditor, if I am an auditor in LTO, what I can do now is to go typically through the set administrative procedure, to write to TID, and then we get back, and then you have the request sent to science. The change, however, and what we hope to do, is to have a more interactive relationship, whereby if I am from LTO and I require science support, I am invited to science, or science will walk to LTO or MTO and to that specific auditor, and we sit down and dissect the issues. We look at who is this player, what does he manufacture, what is this process like, so that we can tie in. And of course, over time, the times we've done that, we found that yields better results than working apart in time and space. Space being office, time being that you've written the memo, we do it, and then we send back those results. So we, as an auditor, you should expect that you're going to be more collaborative in doing the audits, but also sharing our risks. So the auditor should not wait up to when they are almost having a closing meeting with the taxpayer, and then they write to science for support. What is advisable is, as and when you're going into an entity whose business affairs are of a manufacturing nature, please seek for support so that we get the story from the start. That usually provides, has resulted to better audit outcomes than what transpired before now. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I will also put this before you. One participant, Moses asked, you mentioned something to do with standards in India.
Yeah.
He's asking that, Stephen, please explain better on how URA really implemented these standards on a sector level, because we still have some firms which are probably, non-compliant in that way. I may not specify here for purposes of anonymity. Probably you can talk about standards, whether it has been done, or if it hasn't been done, what are the challenges, and maybe what does the future hold in that aspect.
Okay, thank you, Moses. I think that's a good question, and indeed, the standards is the thing of the future. Like I did mention what they do in India. To come up with standard input-output norms requires a broader collaborative effort within the ministries, departments, and agencies. Most importantly, it requires that URA gets in touch with Ministry of Trade, that gets in touch with Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, and Ministry of Finance, so that they sit together and come up with policies that represent a whole entire, the entire understanding and perspective of government, because of the importance of the manufacturing sector. So what India did is that they have a body that actually coordinates the development of those standard norms, and they have come up with a compendium of those standards. to which someone is held. So that is at national broader level. However, below that, what we have done is we have done sector studies or sector-based studies. For example, we went into the steel industry, and there had been gross, and indeed to say gross is to understate the problem that was there. So there was gross underpayment of tax, gross evasion, and gross everything. So we looked at how do we turn around the outcomes from these audits. And we looked at the value drivers again. Key word is value drivers. If I am an auditor, the word that I think one of the things I'll take away from this webinar is a value driver. So we looked at the value drivers. We looked at scrap. The scrap, there's a way they would deal with the weight bridge, so you wouldn't get the right information. Plus also there's that exchange. You bring in scrap, I don't pay you in money terms, but I pay you in finished products. And when we did our study and we used our scientific knowledge, we have quite a very extensive team of competent persons. We said that one of the major value drivers in the steel sector is what they call silicomanganese. And we could develop a sort of a ratio that says if you have this much silicomanganese used in the process, you should have this steel as production. Of course, there was contention here and there, but we came to an understanding that at least you cannot fall below this. We engaged the sector players, but also we did some sort of research and literature review. And we used that standard in auditing the steel sector. And the outcome averagely, I wouldn't want to say absolute figures, but it was billions of shillings. So we have a sector study that was conducted by an able team of both science officers and domestic tax officers. And that report may be referred to as and when any auditor or any tax administrator is conducting an audit of the steel sector. We've done similar studies. We're doing now milling, we've done spirits, we've done beverages. So we are internally trying to do studies and later on consolidate and develop standards for the different subsectors or manufacturers. And when we do that, then we can blow that up and say, let's take it to the national level. Because like I explained, having those efficiency standards has a lot of productive benefits and advantages for the entire economy.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. John, a very important question came through from one Joseph Okelo. Joseph is asking, you are the tax collector.
Okay.
You are the one who is carrying out tests of my items, my imports. Have a consignment, you're carrying out tests, and on the basis of the outcome of your tests, you're going to assess tax. And his worry is, how do we ensure that there is no bias? Because you are interested in collecting taxes. So what are the chances that you will not say that your thing is this and it lies in the highest tax bracket, so that you can collect as much tax as possible? Talk about the bias. How do you shield against the bias?
Thank you, Joseph. First of all, I'll mention two things actually. One is that one of the things which, of course we are interested in the revenue, but fairness is also part of the, shall I say, business of tax really. You cannot collect what is not due. And how do we deal with that in the lab? First of all, there is the lab is not resident in the customs where the final assessment and collection of these taxes is. It is not in that department. And when a sample is brought, I'm not aware of who it is coming from and, you know, who they are. There is that kind of independence. And then there is also an issue of ethics. Scientifically speaking, it is only ethical to do what is right. So if I carry out analysis and the result is, let me say, favorable to whoever the owner of the sample is, so it is, and that is science. It has to be objective. And if, on the other hand, it is not favorable to the importer and revenue is to be collected, then that's what it is. At the end of the day, this result must stand the test if it's contested. So I would not go into the line of being biased to tweak the result for the interest of revenue. If it's contested, then it should stand the test.
Okay, some very important take-homes from what you have mentioned there. You are saying that the lab is not fused with the customs process.
Yes.
In other words, you do not have the people who are actually receiving the goods as customs officers at the same
Influencing
time
the lab.
influencing or even carrying out the test. So
Yes.
you have a separate team of people who do the testing.
Yes.
And you also said that these tests, you do not necessarily know who is behind the consignment.
Yes.
All you have is a
A
sample
sample.
test.
Yes.
And you give results depending on the request from customs.
Yes.
If it is A, you tell them it is A. And it's not to be as thought or that kind of thing.
Yes.
We're clear on that.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess that clears the air for Joseph. Please rest assured that once your item is being subjected to a lab test in URA, there are no concerns of bias. There are no concerns of bias, and everything will be done scientifically. And John is also attesting to the issue that this can still be redone.
Yes.
Because it is a scientific process.
Yes.
It should be redoable, and the same results should be
come up.
Okay. That is good to note. Thank you very much, the panelists here. You know, it is not so easy to get scientists to speak in a normal way. In what do they call it? In a layman's, they try to, I mean, they struggle because they want to use a scientific word, and then they remember that the moderator said nothing scientific here. Make sure you are as plain as possible. So I totally would wish to thank you for sticking to what we agreed upon in the beginning and not really throwing our participants or the viewers into a frenzy of scratching their heads. For those who have attended the webinar, please, our apologies where things have been a little bit complicated. I know a word or two, or could have skipped their lips, and but we thank you. We thank you so much. The questions that came through, we're so sorry we couldn't go through all of them. Some were not so much inclined to the topic of discussion, so we really couldn't go through them. Others we tried to bundle them together, and we tried to get answers, and others were not responded to directly, but I paraphrased and put the questions before the panelists. So thank you so much. I hope that this has been of some use to you, the viewers, internally and externally, but most especially externally. And depending on the feedback, probably we shall have some more time to critically look at some of the concerns that you have put forward. Thank you very much.